Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. Shortly, I'll be passing to Tristram, ISE's Chief Research Officer, who will be providing the latest COVID-19 data from our recent supplier survey. But before that, if you haven't taken part in one of our webinars before, you can leave your questions in the question box just on the software panel on the right-hand side. I will keep an eye on it, and I will feed your questions through to Tristram at the end of the session. Also, this webinar is being recorded, so the recording will be available on our website by the end of the day, and you will also receive a link to it. That's it from me. All yours, Tristram.
Okay, great. Well, so I'm going to talk today about our COVID-19 supplier survey, but I'm just going to put it in a bit of context. So we produce these COVID-19 bulletins every week. There hopefully should be a new one coming out tomorrow. Just got to finish it off right now. So that's a really useful source of information about what's some of the latest policy, what's some of the latest data, and then we also summarize the insights that we're getting from employers during that week. So it really is kind of, I suppose, the place to go to get all the up-to-date information that you need on the current situation. We've also got a whole load of publications on our publications page. So I'm going to talk through one of them today, but there's various others that you can have a look at. So if you're an ISE member, there's lots of resources for you. Please come on our website and have a look. What I'm going to try and focus on today is this survey that we did, which is about the experience of suppliers. And so by suppliers, we mean really any labour market intermediary. So anyone who isn't an educational organisation, a university or a school, and also isn't an employer themselves. So, I mean, many of our suppliers, of course, do employ people, but they're not routinely recruiting large numbers of young people or entry-level staff. And so they're people who help to link up education and employment. So they might be marketing companies, they might be careers organizations, they might be jobs posting sites, a whole range of different kinds of organizations are members of the ISE who are suppliers. And what we're going to talk about primarily today is what they were saying about the current situation. And they're interesting, I think, both because of their own services and what they're providing. They're also interesting because they have really good knowledge of the wider labour market. So they're talking to multiple firms, they're hearing messages from people. So there's a lot of insights that they can offer us. So what I'm going to do in this webinar is I'm going to give you a few brief updates, more sort of broad updates of the kinds of things that you might find in our bulletins. I'm then going to move on to talk specifically about the supplier survey findings, and then I'm going to finish by introducing you to the directory of services that has emerged from that supplier survey. So let's start with some updates. So politically, what's happening at the moment is the national lockdown is in place, but I think for the first time really last week, and I think it's been intensifying this week, serious planning is going on about the easing of the lockdown. The government's been meeting with businesses and trade unions and trying to agree what's the right path out of lockdown. But what I think has become clear is lockdown is unlikely to disappear in one go. So rather, it's going to be gradually eased, and we will see the returning of some sort of normality. But we're unlikely to see all of the restrictions on our movement and interactions disappearing in one go. So given that, I think reconstruction and recession are likely to be key political themes going forwards, and I'll talk a bit more about that as we go on. So, I mean, this is a page that I got out of The Economist maybe a week or two ago, and it was highlighting the fact that Britain is facing the fastest economic contraction on record. And so that raises the question of what's going to happen to the economy over the long run. And there are various scenarios. I think it's becoming increasingly unlikely, indeed impossible now, that we're actually going to escape a recession altogether. So what people are really hoping for is what's called a V-shaped recession. So, you know, we were all going along quite well in February, and we weren't expecting this, and we moved into recession very, very quickly. The hope is that the economy will bounce back very quickly and we will come out of it. Alternatives are that we might see something that's more U-shaped. So we've dropped down into a recession. That recession may last for a little while before we start climbing out. Or in a nice metaphor that I've heard talked about from a few people, perhaps the recession is going to be more like a wheelbarrow. So we'll see this sharp decline in the economy and then potentially quite a prolonged recession and then a slow climb out. And I think probably that is the most likely, but you know, obviously no one really knows, and we'll be watching this very carefully. In terms of the education system, schools and colleges are all closed. The GCSEs and A-levels have been cancelled, and we've now got details of how the qualifications will be awarded. Schools and colleges are going to be asked to provide data based largely on teacher judgments on which qualifications and grades will be awarded. Universities have clarified how the awarding of degrees will work, and from an employer point of view, what it should mean is that the qualifications come out in a similar kind of timescale to they normally do. But we're starting to see universities planning for an autumn term online. So it's part of this whole idea that we may not have a sort of immediate cessation of lockdown, but rather a sort of gradual phased return to some kind of normality. In the labour market, we're seeing some very worrying things. So we've seen this very big drop off in job postings. So, and we've got various data sources that demonstrate this, but it's still going on. The drop off is still continuing. So there are less and less jobs being advertised than you might expect at this time of year. And the flip side of that is we're seeing increasing claims for universal credit. So growing unemployment, essentially. I mean, universal credit covers a number of people who are not strictly unemployed, but essentially we're seeing both a decline in the number of new jobs and an increase in the number of people claiming benefits because their work is not enabling them to live. We've also got the furloughing scheme, which is now very well established, and we're starting to see very, very great numbers of people on that furloughing scheme. So we've got a very substantial impact to the wider labour market. If we then look at the student recruitment market in particular, the student labour market, this is now somewhat old, this data, but it was data that we collected really right at the beginning of this crisis, perhaps in the some point in March. And what we found was that broadly the pattern told us that employers were ceasing recruitment, ceasing to go out and do active attraction and go onto campus. Obviously, it very quickly became impossible. But what they were trying to do was to continue with their selection and assessment processes. So trying to get the candidates that they've already got to assess them and decide whether they were people they wanted to appoint. And they were doing that by moving that online. So that's a very important process that we're seeing, is lots of our ordinary working processes, particularly processes associated with recruitment, are shifting online and becoming very much more digital than they were. At that time, in the beginning of March, our employers were telling us that the biggest proportion of our employers were saying that they were carrying on as planned. Quite a lot of them were saying they didn't know whether the numbers of students they were going to hire this year was going to go up or down. But if people did have a sense, then they generally thought it was going to go down. So generally, it was a slight decrease rather than a substantial decrease in the numbers. But I think there's good reason to think that the student labour market might contract somewhat this year. And in our conversations with employers, this is what they were telling us last week. So on recruitment, firms that are interested in moving to virtual careers fairs for next year. There's a lot of concerns about whether getting onto campus is going to be possible, visiting schools is going to be possible. People are generally thinking that isn't going to be likely. And so we're going to be seeing a shift to virtual careers fairs. In terms of their September or late summer, early autumn starters, many firms are currently still finalising the numbers of new starters that they plan to take on. Some are deferring to later start dates. So, for example, saying, well, we're not going to start any of our new recruits in August or September as we perhaps might usually do, but instead moving to a position where they're going to recruit, they're going to have them starting in January. Salaries, we think, won't be any higher. Firms are kind of watching the bottom line quite a lot. And we also probably can make a guess that where firms have not already recruited people, they're probably not going to be recruiting very many new hires unless something very big changes. So firms are spending quite a lot of time thinking about how they're managing the workload for current employees. So early career staff are often seeing that they're being moved around the firm. I mean, some have been furloughed, but those that are still there may find that their work is changing quite a bit with this current situation. And we think that apprentices may be somewhat more likely to be furloughed than graduate trainees, as they can still train when on furlough. So that's something that some employers are doing. And after graduate schemes particularly, although I suspect this may also be true at the end of apprenticeships as well, firms are reporting that they may not always have jobs for graduates who've been through a graduate scheme. So the graduate schemes will vary quite a bit. Some, once you're in, you have a permanent contract. Others are put on contracts which are for the length of their training, so usually say 2 years. At the end of that, many firms would expect graduates to apply for jobs within the business, and some are flagging that these may not be there. So there's a mixed picture. It's certainly not a complete collapse, but there are many reasons to be somewhat concerned about the state of the student labour market. So let's move on to see what our suppliers were telling us about this picture as they see it. So we had a survey. It was open in the first week of April, and the main aim was to gather details of services offered by ISE supplier members, and we had 58 valid responses. So what were they doing? Well, our suppliers are offering a wide range of different services. Very commonly, they're things like online platforms. They might include consulting services. They might include various kinds of online tools and so on. And so overall, I think the pattern that we're seeing is pretty much everything that people are emphasizing at the moment is about helping people to move online. And so people are going to suppliers largely for that reason, to get help in moving their services online. And the suppliers are working with a range of different types of organizations. So they might be working with employers, but also with universities and with schools. And we asked them specifically to talk about what services they offered that might be relevant to the COVID-19 crisis. And again, the focus was on online recruitment, online careers provision offered into schools and colleges, online brokerage, replacement, online events, and online learning and development. So we've got lots of things that are online, but there are 2 other categories that are in there that are helpful. So most of what suppliers are doing at the moment is helping people to move their existing services online through the provision of tools, but also offering consultancy. It's been a very difficult situation. Many employers are not sure how best to address it. Certainly in the ISE, we're hosting regular town hall meetings with suppliers with employers, and we're getting them to talk about the situations that they're experiencing. A lot of those employers are not sure how to deal with some of the issues that they're currently dealing with. They're sharing practice with us, but they're also going to our suppliers and asking for help and advice from people who are experienced. So that's a key service that suppliers are offering. And then the other real category here that's not about moving people online is the provision of replacement capacity. So in some cases, firms may be experiencing large numbers of people off sick, unable to do some of the work that they're normally doing. They may be even experiencing peaks in demand that are unusual. And in that case, many of the suppliers will allow them to use their staff, their capacity to bring in replacement capacity. So these are some of the key categories that are being offered by suppliers. And we also ask the suppliers, how do they think this current situation is impacting on recruitment numbers? And remember, this is somewhat after the original survey that we did with employers. Of course, these suppliers are not actually they're not answering about themselves, but they're answering about their perception of the organizations they're working with. Most of them, or the plurality of them, felt that in most categories of hires, there would be a decrease, generally in the slight decrease in numbers overall. But in the area of interns and placement students, they were less optimistic. They thought that there was very likely that employers would be reporting a very big decrease in the number of interns and placement students that they were employing. So we're seeing a perception amongst suppliers, and it is only a perception, but it's, I think, a very informed perception, that the situation in the labour market is rather worse than it perhaps was when we looked at it from the employer's perspective a couple of weeks earlier. So we then asked our suppliers to reflect on what the impact of COVID-19 was. And I've just got some quotes here that I think capture some of the main perspectives that people adopted. So the first one, which is undoubtedly correct, is that the situation is still evolving and the full impact will not be clear for some time. The ability to flex as these changes become clear is going to be incredibly important. And so this fact that there's so much unknown about how the next few months and years are going to unfold, that actually being kind of fairly open-minded and flexible is going to be a good strategy for many employers, undoubtedly also for many labour market entrants as well. So that's one thing. However, there were also a group who were very optimistic. They generally felt that that COVID-19 might be leading to some kind of permanent change. So for this one, for example, it will possibly change many organizations for the better, for the long term. We're all remembering to be human at last. Winning employers will sustain this beyond COVID-19 because employees will expect it as the new norm. So we get that kind of perspective, and then we also get this one, which is essentially about digitization. So as an agency, we're looking at this as the forced opportunity for firms to actually change their ways of working and understand that technology can be successfully used and companies still deliver. So there are these different kind of perspectives that are emerging about what might happen in the long run. So while suppliers are worried about the labour market, they're worried about their businesses in the short term, some of them are looking forward and seeing the possibility that we may see a stronger focus on people, a different kind of working culture emerging, and others are seeing this as something which is going to drive digitization, which, as we've seen already, is an area that many of our suppliers are very involved in. More pessimistically, some are talking about recession. So this company, this supplier said reports are suggesting that businesses will be deemed successful if their 2020 revenues are 50% or more of their 2019 revenues. And this means that many businesses will struggle to have the budget in place to do all the things that they want to do in student recruitment, as ultimately budgets will have substantial cuts to the nice to have services. Student recruitment will continue as ultimately it's cheap labour, but teams' resources will be scaled back to the basics. So I think that's a really, somewhat depressing, but undoubtedly some insightful picture, is that while student recruitment may continue, the industry itself may shift as a result of some of these changes that we're seeing. So this is something that I think we will very much be keeping an eye on over the next few months and years. Is this going to become a critical point when, yes, maybe work in general changes, but also the actual student recruitment market itself changes. And then finally, one of our other suppliers just wrote, "It's a bit annoying, isn't it?" Which I think we're all probably starting to feel at this point. So, so we get different perspectives from suppliers about how they think the labour market is going. Some are looking at this period as a period of optimistic renewal. Others are more pessimistic and seeing it as the beginning of a recession. So whatever your position is, whether you're an educational organisation, whether you're an employer, or whether you're a supplier yourself, you may well need some kind of help and support. So one of the things that we've done is take some of the information that we gathered through this survey and make it available so that you can access it more easily. So if you go onto our website and go to the knowledge section and then research and publications, you will find yourself on a page that looks something like this. And if we look down that list of 2020 publications, which seem to be growing longer and longer every time we look at it, you'll see one which is relates to this research that I've just been talking about, responding to COVID-19, the experience of suppliers. And in that option, you will also see the opportunity to download the directory of supplier services. So if you are interested in finding somebody who can help you with one of these problems that we've talked about, so perhaps help you to deal with capacity issues, or perhaps if you're looking for some help and advice, or perhaps if you're looking to get some online services that might support your business, then download this supplier directory, and what it will get you is an Excel sheet that looks like this. And what you can see here is you've got a series of different organizations. They give some information about their organization and then the services that they provide relevant to COVID-19. And what we've also done, or you may need, depending on which service you're using, you may need to just click on this button. So we've got a button which says enable editing here, which is something that sometimes you see when you download things from Excel. So if you're having problems getting it to work, it's probably you need to look for this little band and just enable the editing. But what we've also done is put into this spreadsheet that we're giving you a series of filters. And so, and they basically, you can look along the top and you can see various different options you might be looking for. So perhaps you're looking to find a company that provides online platforms for universities or online platforms for schools and colleges. And if you just click on that arrow that's next to that, you'll get a little window like this, and you can either sort it A to Z to find the ones that meet your criteria, or you can just click on the ones that meet your criteria using those checkboxes below. And you may want to put in multiple categories depending on what you're looking for and see which firms come out. It's worth having a look through all of the firms there. They may inspire you and give you some ideas of services that might be helpful to you. But this, these filters are designed just to help you search a little bit more easily. So in summary, I think I would say that COVID-19 has had a big impact on the student labour market so far. Suppliers are right in the middle of it and all of the issues that are emerging. They have expertise and capacity that might be useful to employers and education providers over the next few months and years. And our directory is really designed to help you find the suppliers that you need. So some information about me here if you want to get in touch with me and ask me any more questions, but we've got plenty of time in this webinar if anybody has got any further questions and they want to ask either about any of the issues that I've raised about the current situation with COVID-19 and the kind of its impact on student recruitment, or any of the specifics about the supplier research or the directory that we were offering here.
Fantastic, thank you, Tristram. Yes, as Tristram has just said, if you have any queries, if you have any questions, please leave them in the question box just on the software panel on the right-hand side. If you missed the start of the webinar, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website by the end of the day. So feel free to pass it along to your colleagues who might be interested. Also, keep an eye on our website and our social media for any upcoming webinars. Tomorrow we have a webinar with Mark and the Future team, who will be talking about how to engage school leavers and apprentices during the COVID-19 crisis. Perhaps maybe a couple of more minutes to give an opportunity to ask questions, if you have any.
Just while people are thinking if they've got any questions, I would just bring people's attention to the fact that we have a survey running at the moment for employers. And so the purpose of that survey is really to update some of the insights that I presented to you that we gathered during March, and really give us a kind of up-to-date picture of where employers are at the end of April, as perhaps we begin to move towards exiting lockdown and we start to return to some sort of normality. So if you are an employer and you haven't completed that survey yet, then please do. It will be open until the end of the day on Monday, so you've still got a few days to fill it in. So please do go ahead and fill it in.
We have a question from Ivy. Thanks, very interesting. Do you have a sense of what companies are doing to support vulnerable students or disadvantaged students taking part in virtual or online assessment centres?
Yeah, I mean, it's been talked about quite a bit. So, I mean, I think everybody recognises that there is a danger that the current kind of crisis undoes a lot of the work that firms have been trying to do around diversity and inclusion. And I think particularly the shift to online raises that with respect to a number of groups. So particularly any students who don't have access to their own IT or suitable IT, probably to people who live in rural and remote areas where connectivity is not great, and then people who've got various different kinds of learning disabilities and visual impairments and so on, who find it difficult to use the technology. I must admit I've heard this discussed quite a few times by employers who are concerned about it. I'm not sure I've heard a really clear response to it. I think people have got to understand that employers are struggling to get processes up and running that give them any kind of operational capability over the summer. I think you know there's not a lot of additional support. But if you are either a candidate who has an issue like that, or if you're a teacher or a careers advisor who are working with a potential candidate who's got issues like that, can absolutely get in touch with employers and inform them, because they are very aware of this as an issue, and I think they will do what they can to make case-by-case workarounds for people. So I think that's something absolutely to be aware of, but I don't think we've got a kind of concrete industry-wide response to that yet.
Thank you. Paul is asking, any views on sector impact differentials collated?
Yeah, so we haven't got a very good answer on this yet. That's one of the reasons why we're doing this new survey. We've asked some more sector-based questions in there. I've talked about this in previous webinars. You might want to have a look, but there's some interest. I presented some of that data, which is the number of job postings, and EMSI. If you look on their website, they have done some very useful analysis of what job postings are going up and down. So where are there more job postings and less job postings? The honest truth is that it's bad for pretty much everybody. So it's less sectorally determined than it is occupationally determined. So we're seeing some, so the only jobs that are really seeing improvements are things like nursing, care work, sadly things like undertaking as well. But we're seeing drop-offs in almost all other types of occupations. From talking to the sector groups of employers, it's clear that there are going to be some differences in the ways in which this situation affects different sectors. At the moment, that's not that clear because most sectors are fully locked down. A lot of it will depend on how the lockdown is sort of unspooled really, and so we could see, for example, much bigger impact in retail if retail stays locked down. Clearly, the travel industry is going to take a hit. There are a number of obvious places, but we don't have very clear and concrete data on which sectors are planning for a decline, and we hope by the beginning of May we will be producing that.
Thank you. Helen, for a question, what was the company website called again? I'm not sure if she's talking about the ISE website.
Yeah, so if you go on, so probably the best place to send it, if you go onto the ISE website and you look at the bulletins that we've produced, which I gave a link for earlier, then all of the resources that I think are useful. I mean, what I really try and do is gather together labour market resources on that site. So if you're interested, for example, in getting more sectoral breakdowns, go to our website, find that bulletin section, which is in the news section, and you'll see week by week there are different links and resources that are up-to-date resources for understanding what's going on in the labour market. So there's lots and lots of stuff there, and really, you know, I'd really encourage people to get into the habit of looking through that, because I think at the moment one of the challenges that we've got is there's very little concrete government data that tells us about the labour market. It just doesn't move quick enough. So what we're trying to do is to assemble various different sources together that give us a kind of composite picture of what's going on in the labour market. And so that's really what those bulletins are about.
Great, thank you. A question from Bridget. Do you think apprenticeships will be impacted more negatively than graduate jobs?
It's difficult to say. A lot will depend on what is the response from the government, both on graduates and apprentices. I think apprenticeships are going to be quite vulnerable for a number of reasons. One will be because of the viability of apprenticeship providers, who I know have been struggling for various reasons. I think we'll have to wait and see, but I think, I mean, it's been a question that I've had for quite a number of months, even years, is we have seen a steady increase in the number of apprenticeships over the last few years in the kind of firms that ISE is usually working with. One of my questions has always been, does that mean that when we hit a recession, will apprentices numbers be cut, or will graduate numbers be cut? And I think that question is now a very open one, and there will be cases on both sides. But yeah, I think there's certainly reasons to be concerned about the volume of both apprenticeship and graduate recruitment going forward.
Fantastic, thank you. That's all the questions we've had. Right, so thank you, Tristram, and thank you everyone for joining in, and tune in for our next webinar. Have a great day.
All right, thank you.